Welcome in to Outkick the Show. I am your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I appreciate all of you coming and spending your Tuesday afternoon with me. My show, as always, presented by sportsbookreview.com. Check them out, the logo behind me on the screen. If you need to go get the best possible line anywhere on the internet, make sure you shop around and get the best possible number. I'll be speaking at their event next week out in Las Vegas with Jason Whitlock. Should be a lot of fun. Sportsbookreview.com. All right, also, my guy, Ryan Kelly, he climbed the Grand Tetons out in Wyoming for charities. Not the kind of guy to toot my own horn, but he has been raising a lot of money for a variety of different charities. TheHomeLoanExpert.com, and your boy right here, LeBron James style, was the biggest biggest donor for his charity campaigns. But he's not only climbing mountains, he's making your mountain of debt disappear. He can wipe out all your credit card debt. He can take care of you at TheHomeLoanExpert.com. Ryan Kelly, get hooked up now. Incredible what he did to climb and raise as much money as they have for a variety of different sources. Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, Fight DMD, the Cardinal Glennon Health Clinic hospital in St. Louis, a bunch of others as well. A lot of props to him for everything that he did to make the world better. All right, let's get into some big stories. We got a couple of big stories. I'm going to dive into them here. Maryland has just had a press conference. I watched part of the press conference featuring their president, Wallace Lowe, I believe is his name, and the athletic director, Damon Evans. Formerly, Damon Evans was the athletic director at Georgia. He was fired for getting a DUI and driving around with another woman's panties in his lap. Incredible combo moves there in the Atlanta area. Now he is in charge of Maryland as their program is under siege. I'm going to ask you the question. What is it that has made the Big Ten so suddenly toxic? And also we're going to talk about Trump versus Omarosa, what's going on there, and we will break down all of the drama surrounding that mess. But I want to start with this situation, the Maryland mess. It is awful, obviously, anytime someone dies in a college athletic training related event. The news that came out of this press conference was that Maryland has basically parted ways with their athletic trainer. The challenge, I think, anytime you investigate a situation like this, and I mean this across the board, no matter where you are playing, whether it's a high school, whether it's a college, it's knowing when someone is physically incapable of pushing themselves further and when they are still capable of pushing themselves further. And I think no matter where you have played athletics in your life, you would acknowledge that it is oftentimes very hard to know. And let's start here. I don't believe there is any training staff in the world that is rooting for their student athletes or their players to be injured or hurt in any way, right? I think they are of the belief that they are pushing these guys as hard as they possibly can, and knowing where that limit is and where the difference is between I'm tired and I'm physically in peril is, I think, a really difficult line to figure out. And in retrospect, when bad things happen, everybody goes back and they look at it and they say, oh my God, how in the world did this happen? I think it's more challenging than just, oh, this person is awful or this program is unacceptable. I have this theory in general that most college football programs are pretty similar in terms of what they put their players through, strength and conditioning wise. For this reason do I think it's similar, because everybody learns from everybody else. DJ Durkin didn't spend his entire career at Maryland. It's unlikely that suddenly he went to Maryland and did something totally different than what had worked everywhere else he had been before. So we start there. I think in retrospect, what I always say is don't look at the result and work your way back. Look at the overall system and figure out, was there a flaw there? Because sometimes when players die, you find out later, a la Reggie Lewis, that they had a heart defect. and that they don't know exactly what happened. If you remember years ago with Corey Stringer and the Minnesota Vikings, the guy overheated. They have an incredibly talented, I'm sure, training staff in Minnesota, and they did not know that he was in that much peril when he died. So I always want to start with, there is always a desire, I think, and I think it's been particularly magnified now in social media, to immediately presume the worst about anybody who is involved in something that goes bad. And I think trying to figure out exactly what went wrong at Maryland is an instructive lesson, not just for people who are looking to score points because they hate Maryland or whatever else, but in a larger college athletics program. And that leads me into this question. What is going on in the Big Ten? All right, I've got a list here of things that I'm going to run down that have happened in basically the last 4 or 5 years at Big Ten schools. At Indiana, Kevin Wilson was fired for abusive treatment of players. He now has been hired at Ohio State. At Ohio State, you have the wrestling scandal, and you have everything surrounding Urban Meyer and what was known or should have been known around Zach Smith, wide receiver coach. At Penn State, you had the Jerry Sandusky mess, which is a different caliber of scandal. At Michigan State, you had the Larry Nassar case, which ESPN tried to tie in to Tom Izzo and Mark D'Antonio, and it appears that that connection was not allowed to be made, but the Larry Nassar scandal is incredibly ugly. Tim Beckman at Illinois was fired for mistreatment of players allegations. Kyle Flood at Rutgers was fired for improper work off the field with his players from an academic context. And Minnesota fired Tracy Claeys for standing up for his players. It's an intriguing story that did not get a lot of attention in the wake of a gang rape allegation and investigation. What is going on at the Big Ten? That's a lot of programs, right? Off the field, all of them. We're not talking about coaches getting fired because they didn't win enough games. We're talking about Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, Illinois, Rutgers, and Minnesota. What's happening at the Big Ten, mostly in the Big Ten East? I don't know the answer, but this is the question that I would be asking if I was Jim Delaney. I had Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports national columnist, on my radio show this morning, and we were sitting around debating this story and trying to figure out, is it connected to the Big Ten, or is it totally random and happenstance that all of these scandals have occurred in the Big Ten? In the SEC, let's use the SEC because I think the SEC and the Big Ten are the two best and biggest conferences typically in terms of interest. Bobby Petrino got fired for hiring his mistress and lying about it. It doesn't really feel like it's something systematic. We had a situation where what else? Like in the SEC, you get fired if you don't win enough. I don't understand the way that this thing has broken down. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The entire process, I think, of the Big Ten has become toxic. And I don't know what it is. Is it coincidence that all of these incidences have happened? For instance, I said maybe the reason why it hasn't happened in the SEC is because everybody is so aggressively following their rivals that it's harder to hide scandal. And that's an interesting question, too. It's possible it's coincidence, but it's also possible that Ole Miss and Mississippi State, that if anything improper is going on at all, you have an entire investigative body poring over everything, right? Why did Hugh Freeze get fired? Because Mississippi State fans were so convinced that Ole Miss was cheating that they did Freedom of Information Act requests in order to file a lawsuit on behalf of a former coach. And then they went through every text message that Hugh Freeze had sent over the years until they found out that he had called some escort phone numbers. They did that. That's how desperately they were following the examination. The same thing happens, I feel like, regularly in the SEC because everybody has such a disdain for their rival. They hate each other so much that it keeps everybody's eyes on the ball. Auburn is looking at everything that Alabama is doing. Alabama is looking at everything that Auburn is doing. every SEC school is constantly turning in all of these different reports on each other and allegations, and they got media writing stories, pro and con, and everything else. And I wonder on some level whether that pernicious nature of rivalry leads to such a close examination. Now, I've said this before. I am out of the business of caring about improper benefits. Some of you are going to say, what about Michigan and the tennis shoes? I don't care about that anymore. To the extent that I covered improper benefits in years past, and by improper benefits, I mean paying players, giving them cars, giving them shoes, free meals, all that stuff, I have given it up. Okay, I have given up caring about that because to me, that is the flourishing of capitalism. Capitalism is predicated on selling your talent to the highest possible bidder. If somebody can make money off of their talent in addition to what they are receiving for a scholarship, I don't care about any of that. I think every NCAA rule, when you really break it down, is an unnecessary bureaucracy. Because in my opinion, if you go look at every NCAA rule, all they do is keep the same teams that would be good if there were no rules. The same players who are going to Alabama to play football now would be going to play football at Alabama if there were no rules at all in place. They're not picking South Alabama or UAB over the University of Alabama. Alabama is getting elite level talent. If you are going to go to Kentucky or Ohio State or Kentucky for basketball, that is, or UNC for basketball or any of these other schools, I don't buy into this idea that there is some school that's doing something and everybody else is doing the opposite. I just disagree with it on a fundamental level. But these are all scandals which are borderline criminal in nature, many of them, and they all have to happen in the Big Ten. And don't tell me that if all 8 of these stories had been coming out of the SEC, there wouldn't be a ton of people out there arguing that the SEC had lost its way. So when you see Kevin Wilson at Indiana fired for player mistreatment, when you see the Ohio State wrestling scandal as well as Urban Meyer, Penn State Jerry Sandusky, Michigan State Larry Nassar, Illinois Tim Beckman fired for his mistreatment of players and injury reports, Rutgers Kyle Flood fired, as well as the athletic director there, Julie Herman, Minnesota Tracy Claeys. All of these are entirely off-the-field related incidents. And I can't even think, other than Bobby Petrino, I can't think of an SEC coach being fired entirely for off-the-field related incidents. You don't win enough, everybody knows you get fired, but fired, and you can maybe argue that the situation with Hugh Freeze is a little bit similar because maybe Hugh Freeze doesn't get fired but for his off-the-field related transgressions. I would argue if he just had the off-the-field related transgressions and there were no NCAA issues, that this would have never arisen. But it's worth thinking about, is it a coincidence or is something going on in the Big Ten? Has the Big Ten given up so aggressively in order to try to win games that despite the fact that the SEC, they say all they care about is winning football, is something going on at all in the Big Ten? I think it's an intriguing question. Are there any questions about Maryland, about Ohio State, about any of these Big Ten related issues that are going on that you guys want me to address either on Facebook or Twitter? And then I'm going to move on to Donald Trump versus Omarosa. And I think all of you would agree that that's going to be and continues to be a messy situation. I don't even want to get into the Ohio State wrestling deal, but there's an allegation of sexual abuse on behalf of an Ohio State-related wrestling mess. What's the appropriate punishment for Urban? Does DJ Durkin survive? Those are the big questions probably that most people are going to ask. I think that Urban Meyer, best case scenario, is going to get suspended for many games, 4 or 5 games. Best case scenario, he's getting suspended for multiple games. Maybe they try and bring him back in time for the Big Ten season. I think that the worst case scenario is he gets fired. And I think we have to wait and see who knew what and what procedures and protocols were followed. And also, nobody's been able to answer me this question. It seems strange, first of all, to say we're going to make a decision on this. This committee's going to make a decision within 14 days. The other thing is, we still don't know what the committee's doing. Remember at Baylor when the committee investigated Art Briles and then they provided an oral report and they didn't actually put anything in writing so that there was nothing that could be Freedom of Information Act requested so people could review it. What is this committee actually producing? Are they producing a written report which makes a recommendation as to what their findings are as well as what should happen to Urban Meyer? Or are they just going out and doing an overall report in general that is going to be oral in nature? They'll deliver it to the president of the university and the other board of trustees members, and then we don't ever see what they uncovered. I am always of the opinion, as somebody who worked doing these independent investigations, I think you should have to provide a written report. And I think that written report should be reviewed by everybody who has an interest in this case so they can see what was actually uncovered. If it's an oral report and there's no actual recommendation, then I think it lets the president of Ohio State off the hook because he can basically do whatever he wants. DJ Durkin, again, my question on DJ Durkin is this. Anytime that a player dies, it seems to me that you can go back and get anonymous quotes. This is just my personal opinion. Anytime a player dies on a high school team, on a college team, on a D3 team, on a lower level school, you can probably go find people who will give you anonymous quotes saying that the atmosphere was crappy, that everybody was mistreated, that it was unfair. So I think a lot of times when you use anonymous quotes as justification to presume to explain why something awful happened, that doesn't seem to me like fair journalism, right? If you believe there are issues, I would rather see that article written before somebody actually dies than find somebody who dies, and we don't really know, again, how often this happens. We do know how often this happens, but how often this could be prevented, I don't know. And so, to me, this is always a challenge. I think Maryland will end up probably firing DJ Durkin because they will say, this does away with the story completely. It's not worth defending him at this point because his name has become toxic given the results of this player dying and everything else. But I think it's intriguing, and I would just ask this question. What is the standard that you are setting forward? Clearly, I would say anytime a player dies during a workout, it's the wrong result. Are you setting forth the standard if DJ Durkin is fired that whenever a player dies in a workout, a coach will be fired too? And I just say that because I think it's challenging to know every one of these circumstances is different. Some of these kids have unfortunate heart-related conditions that they don't know about. This happens at all different levels. High school coaches can be out running players. You and I probably played a variety of different workouts. You've probably, if you played high school level sports, been at a situation where somebody has thrown up or somebody has gotten borderline heat stroke. I think it's a little bit of a challenge, and I don't know the easy answer. I think it gets into an intriguing question, which I think is being asked more and more now. What are the obligations and responsibilities of a coach? I think if a NFL player dies, there's very few people out there who immediately say, you have to fire the head football coach, right? When NFL players get in trouble, there is very little response of, oh, you have to fire the head football coach. When NFL players have issues, when assistant coaches do, there's very little, hey, you have to fire the head coach. I think it's an intriguing question. Why is our standard of acceptable behavior higher for a college football coach than it is for an NFL coach? And your answer might well be, well, because they're employed by a university, they are the highest paid, typically taxpayer-funded employee in the state, and so their standard of behavior is high in a way that a professional sports coach wouldn't be because he is not a nonprofit employee. But I do think that's intriguing to ask that question. What is the reasonable standard? What's unacceptable? All of those different things when it comes to this responsibility. And again, I don't have the list of all of the different players who have died as part of training regimens over the years. I think that is a challenge in and of itself, and I don't know that you immediately hold the head coach responsible. Maybe you should. I think that's a debate and a standard that's worthy of having in the wake of Urban Meyer, in the wake of DJ Durkin. What are the standards? What should the acceptable behavior be? What should unacceptable behavior be? and where do the limits of accountability extend? And again, I don't think there are easy answers, but I do think that it is a debate that should be had in the larger college football and college athletics universe, particularly in college football, where I think it's more likely, it seems to me, that players are having health-related issues than in college basketball. And why do college football players have it? I think because you have a lot of unhealthy bodies. You have a lot of big, unhealthy guys, relatively speaking, in college football who can overheat a lot easier running outside on a field, just like what happened with Corey Stringer back in the day. When you are 6'5", 320 pounds, your body heats up in a way that doesn't happen, frankly, for a basketball player or probably a player on scholarship for any other sport. So I do think that's intriguing. All right, let's talk about Trump versus Omarosa. I don't understand it. I don't understand. I will say this about Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is often his own worst enemy. I saw a couple of stats that were fascinating to me. Donald Trump has risen to 29% approval rate among black voters or black people in the United States. That's a massive approval rating that, if it actually translated into an election, would kill identity politics once and for all. All right, I am of the opinion that identity politics is a noxious boil that needs to be lanced on the body of the American public. We have entered into this era where what your race is, what your gender is, what your religion is, what your sexual orientation is, all of that is used to divvy up everybody. And I thought in 2016 we basically had an entirely identity politics laden election. You had Donald Trump using identity politics to appeal to people in the Midwest who ended up winning him the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. You had Hillary Clinton using identity politics to try to sell the idea that everything is awful. Okay? My concern in general with identity politics is that it's predicated on America being awful. You have to point out something that is going awful for your group and argue that the reason it's going awful for them is because of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation. And as a result, what I have seen, and I write and talk about this a lot in the world of sports, is that identity politics has really come to sports, and that everybody out there immediately makes the argument that everything is racist, everything is sexist. Like Donald Trump the other day posed with a biker who had I love the Second Amendment and titties. And the Washington Post was like, oh my God, how in the world could something this sexist happen? And I just take a step back and I'm like, and this happened to me when I said I love the First Amendment of boobs, everybody's like, oh my God, how could you be so sexist? And I'm like, when did you start to argue that it was sexist for men to like boobs? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. Wouldn't it be a lot more sexist if I were like, I don't like women, I hate boobs? That seems to me like it would be sexist. And what we have ended up with, I think, is this great protectionist zone where everything that is something entirely worth a debate having, instead of debating an issue, people just immediately label a subject racist or sexist, okay? And so as a result, what you're trying to do is create a zone where your opinions and your politics is not able to be challenged. And I have seen this happen with rapidity in this country. I think much of what Donald Trump represents, and I've said this for a long time, I think Trump is a vessel that is not the best vessel for what he often argues. Now, I'll use the Omarosa thing as an example. I think Trump tweets too aggressively at people who take action against him. And I think that's very common for people who sit around and look at Twitter all day. You have this idea that people are obsessed with your opinion all day long, every day, and that you have to comment on everything. And I think a lot about this because I'm in the opinion business. But I have found myself spending less time on social media and more time in the external universe. And if Trump did that, if he spent less time marinating in the day-to-day coverage of his administration, I think he would do a much better job. I think he would see a book like Omarosa's and send out a tweet and just say something like, look, I hoped that Omarosa was going to be helpful for the administration. It now seems that my trust in her was misplaced due to the fact that she has been taping me and members of my administration. And I find that to be incredibly disappointing. And it's clear that I was wrong to have trusted her. Boom. And just move on. And just move on instead of tossing out insults. Now, similarly, the media that covers everything Donald Trump does is in a perpetual lather to compare him to Hitler, to say that everything that he does is racist, to create this false narrative that suddenly there's tons of racism and it's rampant throughout the country. There were 20 white supremacists who marched in Washington, D.C. the other day. And credit to the new mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, I believe is her name, who said something that I agree with, which is we're not going to stop this march because the First Amendment is important. And there's a First Amendment right, whether you or I agree with it, to argue in favor of racist politics, right? But there were only 20 people who showed up. 20 people. And there is this idea, I read the New York Times article about this, and there was like, oh my God, can you believe all of the racism that's grown up in this country? I saw it myself when I went on CNN and said I love the First Amendment and boobs, right? I went on CNN and said I love the First Amendment and boobs. And you know what the number one criticism of me that I saw related to politics was? This is what happens when Donald Trump is elected president of the United States. As if suddenly I made the decision to start to be a lover of boobs only when Donald Trump got elected. I worked on Al Gore's presidential campaign. I worked in a Democratic congressman's office for years. Let me tell you, newsflash, I've loved boobs ever since I hit puberty, all right? That's the truth. And so this idea that we sell these artificial narratives, it really bothers me because I think it leads to situations like these. Now, Trump plays into this narrative, I think, by inarticulately using his Twitter account. The decision to call Omarosa a dog, not worth it. Not worth it. The tweet that I just said puts this story to bed. It doesn't continue. It's over. If you want to go after LeBron James, certainly I think that Trump has shown that if you attack him, he's eventually going to attack you best. I am totally fine. I am totally fine with that decision. But do it in a funny way. Don't do it in the way that you chose to do it. Now, the left wing has to start to recognize that when you disagree with a black guy, it doesn't mean you're racist. This is what's fascinating about the Donald Trump versus LeBron James angle to me. LeBron James rips Donald Trump, campaigns against him, calls him a bum, says that his voters are uneducated and misinformed, okay? Does that for a year and a half, gets on the stage with Hillary Clinton and campaigns with her. And then Donald Trump comes back and takes a shot at him. And people say, oh my God, why'd the president attack LeBron James? He didn't attack LeBron James. He counterattacked after a year and a half of being ripped. Now, you can say the president should be above that. You should say the president shouldn't be responding to everybody who rips him. But this is Donald Trump's brand. And then to take it a step further and say, oh, Donald Trump is racist in the way that he responds to black people. The one thing I think you can say about Donald Trump is that he is universally disrespectful of everyone who disagrees with him. Male, female, gay, straight, immigrant, non-immigrant. This guy is disrupting all previous understanding of how the president responds, right? And just like with FDR with the radio, and just like with JFK with television, I think there's an uncertainty how to use Twitter. Way he uses Twitter is incredibly useful. It's incredibly useful. All he has to do is grab that Twitter megaphone and go on and say, vote for this person in the primary, and he alters the trajectory of Republican primaries. There are a lot of people who respond to him. What I would say is I've spent time reading about this because I was kind of fascinated by communication. I went back and read some books recently on the way that presidents communicate and different aspects of presidential communication over the years. And what I found was FDR and JFK were very careful in the way that they used those new mediums because they weren't sure how the overall impact was going to be. And I think if Donald Trump used Twitter 30 to 50% less, his overall approval ratings would go up 5 to 6 points. And I think there is a budding movement, whether it's Kanye West, whether it's Candace Owens, of smart, intelligent thinkers who are independent, who are also happen to be black, that are questioning why black people have been totally committed to the Democratic Party for so long and what they are getting in exchange. There is no other ethnic group in America that is as committed to one political party as black people are to the Democratic Party. I do not think that has served them well. I think as a result, it has led to further identity-laden politics where everybody tries to slice and dice up every group. If 30% of black people voted Republican, then identity politics would cease to exist. It doesn't even have to be a huge percentage, just 30%. And so when I see Trump taking shots at people like Omarosa or taking shots at people like LeBron, I think he needs to be using a scalpel instead of a hammer. And I think he consistently uses a hammer when he should be using a scalpel, right? And intelligently dissecting situations. I wish he was using his communication staff in a more effective manner than the way that he actually is. So that, to me, would be the play that I think makes the most sense. And that will be the way to go in the future. I'm hopeful that 2020 is not going to be an identity politics-laden election. My fear is it's going to be Donald Trump against the most non-Donald Trump-related person possible. So the Democrats are going to nominate a black woman, and everything that's said for the next year and a half of the campaign will be racist or will be sexist. And so we'll have two different identities going head-to-head. What I wish would happen, honestly, is Donald Trump would have to run against an old white guy. Because I think running against somebody like Joe Biden could be the battle that clears this crazy, absurd fever that we're in the middle of. If you got two white guys who are over the age of 70 going head-to-head in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Michigan, and in Minnesota, and in Wisconsin over all these swing votes, Florida as well, then I think you actually have to have a battle of ideas as opposed to a battle of identities. And I think the problem that the Democrats are going to run into is when it comes to identities, Donald Trump is strong. When it comes to ideas, he is not as strong. So the way to beat Donald Trump is not with a war of identities. That's what Hillary Clinton tried to do. I think the way to beat Donald Trump is with a war of ideas. I don't think the Democrats are going to be smart enough to do it, and so I think we're going to have another war of identities in 2020, except the Democrats are going to go even more extreme, and they're going to pick somebody even more identity politics laden than Hillary Clinton was. And so I think it's going to be intriguing to watch. All right. I love all of you guys. If you enjoyed the show, share it. Outkick the show. Go gamble at sportsbookreview.com. Think about those questions that I asked. What about the Big Ten? What about the decision making? What obligations do we think that a coach should have in a college universe? DBAT, boys and girls. SBAT. Sometimes SBAT makes sense. I am Clay Travis. This has been Outkick the Show. Share it with your friends and colleagues. I'll be live with you tomorrow, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern on Fox Sports Radio. See y'all.